thought I'd begin by reading a few verses from Revelation chapter 8. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with the fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. There's a rather dramatic, symbolic description of something going on in heaven, apparently. Prior to those verses I read, before the seventh seal was opened, there's a description of seven seals being opened. No doubt correlates with the seven spirits which are focused in every human being, and the opening of different levels of consciousness, so that finally there is full consciousness in heaven, where then angelic action is initiated, which we've just read about. When people contact the emissary program, they are invited to share in a process of awakening, the awakening of the outer consciousness to union with the angelic consciousness, you could put it that way, where seal after seal is opened. Level after level of substance is generated, and the focus of identity known in each succeeding level. We have that experience as one of ascension. Our consciousness is raised. The first seal relates to the physical level, and that's where all babies are identified, and young people and so on. I won't go all through the progression of the seals, but suffice to say that the opening of each seal does relate to the ascending focus of consciousness, of self, as levels of substance are generated. In the emissary program, in our experience, for example, is it not so that we and others have aspired to experience heaven? We've had our problems, we have our troubles, We have our frustrations and anxieties and resentments. Oh, to be free. Oh, to ascend into heaven and be an angel there. That would be lovely. And even after people go through classes, been on the mailing list for years, there's still the aspiration in so many to get into heaven. And there's no way round that. It is the matter of opening the seals, of letting identity ascend as finer substance is generated. But there does come a point where there is adequate substance generated, fine substance, because of the quality of our living moment by moment, when the seals are opened, I suppose we should say adequately, so that we find ourselves living in heaven. And identity is known in an eternal quality of being. And one expresses oneself as best one may through whatever substance is available in the human form. There's a silence for half an hour. We become aware of the power of stillness. Not just a cliche, but an awareness that external activity is not really what is required to achieve what we're here to achieve. In fact, the whole process changes. Instead of the identity trying to get into heaven, we find that we're an angel seeking to get into the earth. That's the real creative challenge before us. We didn't know that previously. But finding ourselves in heaven, the challenge is to come into the earth. God has been excluded from the earth, and I won't say has been trying to come into the earth, but that is the creative challenge. The angels in heaven, experiencing the fulfillment, the delight of being, no matter what is going on in the external levels of substance, address the challenge of coming into the earth. This is symbolized in the passage I read by, for example, the sounding of the trumpet. Each angel is responsible to sound his or her trumpet in the earth. Or, as it is phrased alternatively, to let the incense of their being be released in the earth. Incense always relates to essence. The angelic presence, when released out of the heaven, has effects in the earth. Not by sweat of the brow, not by organizations or organizing. A little bit of all that may be done in the very peripheral reaches of our being. But actually, the vast majority of angelic function is experienced in the heavenly levels of being, not the externals. Every angel is a focus of divine being, Spirit of God, and has the full range of the Spirit there only there are dominant factors and subdominant factors, differentiations of the one spirit. But each of us is a hologram in the spiritual sense. Now this is significant because when people contact the emissary program, you often hear the moan go up at some point or another that I've been moving in the emissary program and I gave up certain talents, certain career perhaps that I had in a certain field. There are certain essences of my being which I know are dominant, and somehow in the emissary program, in the early stages anyway, one is somehow encouraged to forget that talent as the pathway to fulfillment and wash dishes, weed gardens, clean toilets, etc. And there is invariably in the human consciousness a certain amount of rebellion and resistance and argument about that. Because what about my particular essences? I have a feeling within myself that unless I have chance in life to develop these dominant essences of my being, I will not be fulfilled. How can I get into heaven personally unless I fulfill these essences of my being? Parenthetically, before I talk seriously about this, often those people who talk like that are usually deluded about their level of talent, I've noticed. They were never going to make anything much anyway in that particular field. However, close parenthesis. Speaking for myself, and I suspect for you too, I'm aware of many essences of my being that I know will never be fulfilled. I'm very musical. I like listening to music. I suspect that I could have been a wonderful pianist if only I'd had the musical education, the parents that had pushed me into it perhaps to start with, the time, the money to do it. The essences are here. That didn't work out. I could have been an artist, I think. I feel artistic essences. That didn't work out either. And I could rehearse a long list of careers that or areas of self-expression that I would have loved to have done that I feel the spiritual essences are present. From the angelic point of view, and very often our external capacities come along semi-consciously to go along with this. From the angelic point of view, what is required is an outer capacity, because the outer capacity of the human form is very flexible. It could have done all these things. Businessman, musician, politician, gardener, all those things I love doing in essence, and you would say the same in some way. This facility, the outer form, is very facile, very flexible. It could accommodate many of those essences. if I concentrated spirit through them. But from the angelic standpoint, the question is, what is required in the overall creative process where I am? And we find what we found. Probably just touching in on various avenues of expression. If we can let our outer consciousnesses yield to what the creative process brings us, to what the whole brings us to be done, and we release the essences of our angelic nature into what actually comes, interesting things begin to happen. For one thing, an emissary lives a far more balanced and varied life than most other people. Angels do that, actually. Angels, you see, are quite capable of creating heaven through virtually any form of activity. An angel has that capability. A human ego doesn't, can't do it. But an angel can and does. And therefore, an angel, knowing the eternal nature of its being, is in no hurry to lose the opportunity, the unique opportunity of expressing the particular blend of essences which are required in this short cycle of a life in this form. It's a unique artistic challenge, whatever our circumstances are, to create the experience of heaven out of whatever the raw material of circumstance happens to be. And we naturally accept that challenge with delight, not wanting to change some of the raw material. I'd rather have more of this and less of that. It's all futile, bad habits of the outer consciousness to think that way. Because the angel can very easily create heaven with the raw material which is at hand. And there's no frustration, because every circumstance affords the opportunity to express the creative genius and the essences of one's being. Again, somewhat parenthetically, and this will bring a little pressure when I say this, we must know the experience of heaven before we can offer much leadership on earth. Unless we are experiencing the creative fulfillment which is natural in heaven, our ministry on earth is limited. We still serve, as we know, even with our frustrations and anxieties and fears, we know we're still playing a part. But we must also know that it is a natural part of the cycle for us to generate the fine substance, come into the experience of self in heaven, fulfilled. And then we find that our essences can be expressed, or certain of our essences can be expressed in every moment of our living. And then, after that generalized expression of self, it does happen that there are certain dominant essences of our being which move round into focus so that we can sound this trumpet on earth. we have particular areas of essences for which we are individually responsible for sounding in the body of mankind. And it's important that those do come round, and they will, if we do it right. Because the expression of these essences, angelic essences, are the means of control, government, within the larger body of mankind and beyond. I'd like to look at just a couple of areas where people tend to experience frustration. Frustration because they feel they are not expressing the essences of themselves in that field. I suppose one is sexual relationships. I think we can all relate to feelings of frustration. We have these essences of love present within ourselves. There's no one in our vicinity that we can see who complements these intense currents of love, which are essences of our being, which we long to release into the earth. Well, much of the frustration generated in the human being is because they are actually focused in form, in the level of form. The art of arriving on earth, if you can put it that way, is to begin to release the essences, the currents, the incense, with the forms that are actually available, even though they may not be being married or having some physically intimate relationship with someone. Well, that's a tough thing. That's the situation. Must we be frustrated? No. The angel in heaven, one with his or her own essences, that's who they are after all, feel these currents emerging. Now you look around in the earth for someone to complement the current that may be moving of love. Now, it would be hardly appropriate to jump on the first person of the opposite sex one clapped eyes on in one's environment. It wouldn't be creative. It's not the creative way to do it. However, one will find in one's world a symbol of the beloved. A person who maybe sat at the dinner table and one can smile at them, converse with them in the current of the essences of your being, appropriately. But you know that you are releasing into the earth with this particular contact point, complementary factor in the earth. Actually, it's a complementary factor in heaven, but it looks as though it's someone out here, and one relates to them appropriately, fittingly, creatively. And those essences are released. And so it goes on. There's a progression of form available to one to release these essences. Holding hands, giving a hug. If it is done in the pure essences of one's being, artistically, you will find that you are releasing these essences of one's being, sexual factors. So that all you have as a contact point on earth is someone you can hold hands with. But the power is being released, the fire is being released through that small symbol. And without developing this line of thought too much, if it is the pure, clear essences of spirit which you release through that small symbol, it moves out and actually achieves what it needs to achieve, and also is part of the creative process whereby a more substantial form or symbol is being created through which greater intensity may in due season be released as needed in the creative cycle. We have to use the symbols that are present in our environments now exactly as they are, release the essences of spirit ourselves through those available forms, symbols, as part of the creative process for the achievement of larger purposes of the creative process, and also the creation of a more substantial form through which greater power may be released in due season. So we need never be frustrated, actually, in that field, if one realizes, in any case, that fulfillment is always primarily in the experience of essences. I'm quite sure many of you have experienced more fulfillment sexually, in essence, communion. On occasion where you've held hands with someone, and you can contrast that with having actual sexual intercourse with someone where those essences were not actually in focus. One is delightful and thrilling and fulfilling. The other is an empty husk. The form is not the dominant factor, ever. It's not to say, obviously, there's not some fulfilling factor related to all levels of form, but it is not the core factor of fulfillment.